This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham. Read by Adrian Pretzelis, Santa Rosa, California, April 2007. Chapter 1. The Riverbank. The mole had been working very hard all the morning, spring-cleaning his little home, first with brooms, then with dusters, then on ladders and steps and chairs, with a brush and a pail of whitewash, till he had dust in his throat and eyes, and splashes of whitewash all over his black fur, and an aching back and weary arms. Spring was moving in the air above and in the earth below and around him, penetrating even his dark and lowly little house with its spirit. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham, Chapter 2. The Open Road. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. "Ratty," said Mole suddenly one bright summer morning, "if you please, I want to ask you a favour." The Rat was sitting on the river bank singing a little song. He'd just composed it himself, so he was very taken up with it, and would not pay proper attention to Mole or anything else. Since early morning he had been swimming in the river in the company with his friends the ducks, and when the ducks stood on their heads suddenly, as ducks will, he would dive down and tickle their necks just under where their chins would be if ducks had chins, till they were... This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 3. The Wild Wood. The Mole had long wanted to make the acquaintance of the Badger. He seemed, by all accounts, to be such an important personage, and, though rarely visible, to make his unseen influence felt by everybody about the place. But whenever the Mole mentioned his wish to the Water Rat, he always found himself put off. "It's all right," the Rat would say. "Badger'll turn up." This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 4. Mr. Badger. They waited patiently for what seemed a very long time, stamping in the snow to keep their feet warm. At last they heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door from the inside. It seemed, as the Mole remarked to the Rat, like somebody walking in carpet slippers that were too large for him and down at heel, which was intelligent of Mole, because that was exactly what it was. There was the noise of a bolt shot back, and the door opened a few inches, enough to see a long snout and a pair of sleepy, blinking eyes. "Now, the very next time this happens," said... This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 5. Dulce Domum. The sheep ran huddling together against the hurdles, blowing out thin nostrils and stamping with delicate forefeet, their heads thrown back and a light steam rising from the crowded sheep pen into the frosty air, as the two animals hastened by in high spirits with much chatter and laughter. They were returning across country after a long day's outing with Otter, hunting and exploring on the wide uplands where certain streams tributary to their own river had their first small beginnings, and the shades of the short winter day were closing in on them, and they had still some distance to go. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 6. Mr. Toad. It was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The river had resumed its wonted banks and its accustomed pace, and a hot sun seemed to be pulling everything green and bushy and spiky up out of the earth towards him, as if by strings. The mole and the water-rat had been up since dawn, very busy on matters connected with boats and the opening of the boating season, painting and varnishing, mending paddles, repairing cushions, hunting for missing boat hooks, and so on, and were finishing breakfast in their little parlour and eagerly discussing their plans for the day, when a heavy knock sounded at the door. "Bother," said the rat, all over egg. "See who it is, Mole, like a good chap, since you've finished." The mole went to attend the summons, and the rat heard him utter a cry of surprise. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 7. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The willow wren was twittering his thin little song, having hidden himself in the dark selvage of the river bank. Though it was past 10 o'clock at night, the sky still clung to and retained some lingering skirts of light from the departed day, and the sullen heat of the torrid afternoon broke up and rolled away at the dispensing touch of the cool fingers of the short midsummer night. Mole lay stretched on the bank, still panting from the stress of the fierce day that had been cloudless from dawn to late sunset, and waited for his friend to return. He had been on the river with some companions, leaving the water-rat free to keep an engagement of long standing with Otter, and he had come back to find the house dark and deserted, and no sign of Rat, who was doubtless keeping it up late with his old comrade. It was still too hot to think of staying indoors, so he lay on some cool dock leaves and thought over the past day and its doings, and how very good they all had been. The rat's light footfall was presently heard approaching over the parched grass. "Oh, the blessed coolness!" he said, and sat down, gazing thoughtfully into the river, silent and preoccupied. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 8. Toad's Adventures. When Toad found himself immured in a dank and noisome dungeon, and knew that all the grim darkness of a medieval fortress lay between him and the outer world of sunshine and well-metalled highroads, where he had lately been so happy, disporting himself as if he had bought up every road in England, he flung himself at full length on the floor, and shed bitter tears, and abandoned himself to dark despair. "This is the end of everything," he said. "At least, it is the end of the career of Toad, which is the same thing. The popular and handsome Toad, the rich and hospitable seaports, the smell of them, the riding lights at night, the glamour." "Well, perhaps you have chosen the better way," said the Water Rat, but rather doubtfully. "Tell me something of your coasting, then, if you have a mind to, and what sort of harvest an animal of spirit might hope to bring home from it to warm his later days with gallant memories by the fireside. For my life, I confess to you, feels to me today somewhat narrow and circumscribed." "My last voyage," began the Sea Rat, "that landed me eventually in this country, bound with high hopes for my inland farm, will serve as a good example of any of them, and indeed as an epitome of my highly coloured life. Family troubles, as usual, began it. The domestic storm cone was hoisted, and I shipped myself aboard a small trading vessel bound from Constantinople by classic seas whose every wave throbs with a deathless memory to the Grecian islands and the Levant. Those were golden days and balmy nights. In and out of harbour all the time, old friends everywhere, sleeping in some cool temple or ruined cistern during the heat of the day, feasting and song after sundown, under the great stars set in a velvet sky. Thence we turned and coasted up the Adriatic, its shores swimming in an atmosphere of amber, rose, and aquamarine. We lay in a wide landlocked harbour. We roamed through ancient and noble cities, until, at last, one morning as the sun rose royally behind us, we rode into Venice, down a path of gold. Oh, Venice is a fine city wherein a rat can wander at his ease and take his pleasure, or, when weary of wandering, can sit at the edge of the Grand Canal at night, feasting with his friends, when the air is full of music, and the sky full of stars, and the lights flash and shimmer on the polished steel prows of the swaying gondolas, packed so you could walk across the canal on them from side to side. And then the food. Do you like shellfish? The wild world out of countenance. "A shilling a leg!" cried Toad. "If you please, I must take a little time to work that out and see just what it comes to." He climbed down off his horse and left it to graze, and sat down by the gypsy to do sums on his fingers, and at last he said, "Shilling a leg! Why, that comes to exactly 4 shillings and no more. Oh no, I couldn't think of accepting 4 shillings for this beautiful young horse of mine." "Well," said the gypsy, "I tell you what I will do. I'll make it 5 shillings, and that's 3 and 6pence more than the animal's worth, and that's my last word." Then Toad sat and pondered long and deeply, for he was hungry and quite penniless, and still some way, he knew not how far, from home, and enemies might still be looking for him. To one in such a situation 5 shillings may very well appear a large sum of money. On the other hand, it didn't seem very much to get for a horse. But then again, the horse hadn't cost him anything, so whatever he got was all clear profit. He said at last, "Look here, gypsy, I tell you what we'll do, and this is my last word. You shall hand me over 6 shillings and 6pence cash down, and further, in addition thereto, you shall give me as much breakfast as I can possibly eat at one sitting, of course, out of that iron pot of yours that keeps sending forth such delicious and exciting smells. In return, I will make over to you my spirited young horse, with all the beautiful harness and trappings that are on him, freely thrown in. If that's not good enough for you, say so, and I'll be getting on. I know a man near here who's wanted this horse of mine for years." The gypsy grumbled frightfully and declared if he did a few more deals of that sort he'd be ruined. But in the end he lugged a dirty canvas bag out of the depths of his trouser pocket and counted out 6 shillings and 6pence into Toad's paw. Then he disappeared into the caravan for an instant, and returned with a large iron plate and a knife and fork and spoon. He tilted up the pot, and a glorious stream of hot, rich stew gurgled into the plate. It was indeed the most beautiful stew in the world, being made of partridges and pheasants and chickens and hares and rabbits and peahens and guinea fowls and one or two other things. Toad took the plate on his lap, almost crying, and stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and kept asking for more, and the gypsy never grudged it him. He thought that he had never eaten so good a breakfast in all his life. When Toad had taken as much stew on board as he thought he could possibly hold, he got up. At last he spoke.
"Toad," he said severely, "you bad, troublesome little animal, aren't you ashamed of yourself? What do you think your father, my old friend, would have said if he had been here tonight and had known of all your goings-on?"
Toad, who was on the sofa by this time with his legs up, rolled over on his face, shaken by sobs of contrition.
"There, there," went on the Badger more kindly. "Never mind. Stop crying. We're going to let bygones be bygones, and try and turn over a new leaf. But what the Mole says is quite true. The stoats are on guard at every point, and they make the best sentinels in the world. It's quite useless to think of attacking the place. They're too strong for us."
"Then it's all over," sobbed the Toad, crying into the sofa cushion. "I shall go and enlist for a soldier, and never see my dear Toad Hall any more."
"Come, cheer up, Toady," said the Badger. "There are more ways of getting back a place than taking it by storm. I haven't said my last word yet. Now I'm going to tell you a great secret."
Toad sat up slowly and dried his eyes. Secrets had an immense attraction for him, because he never could keep one, and he enjoyed the sort of unhallowed thrill he experienced when he went and told another animal after having faithfully promised not to.
"There is an underground passage," said the Badger impressively, "that leads from the river bank quite near here up into the middle of Toad Hall." "Oh, nonsense, Badger," said Toad rather airily. "You've been listening to some of the yarns they spin in the public houses about her. I know every inch of Toad Hall, inside and out. Nothing of the sort, I do assure you." "My young friend," said the Badger with great severity, "your father, who was a worthy animal, a lot worthier than some I know, was a particular friend of mine, and told me a great deal he wouldn't have dreamed of telling you. He discovered that passage. He didn't make it, of course. That was hundreds of years before he ever came to live there. And he repeated
his mission. When the other animals came back to luncheon, very boisterous and breezy after a morning on the river, the Mole, whose conscience had been pricking him, looked doubtfully at Toad, expecting to find him sulky or depressed. Instead, he was so uppish and inflated that the Mole began to suspect something, while the Rat and the Badger exchanged significant glances. As soon as the meal was over, Toad thrust his paws deep into his trouser pockets, remarked casually, "Well, look after yourselves, you fellows. Ask for anything you want," and was swaggering off in the direction of the garden, where he wanted to think out an idea or two for his coming speeches, when the Rat caught him by the arm. Toad rather suspected what he was after, and did his best to get away, but when the Badger took him firmly by the other arm, he began to see that the game was up. The two animals conducted him between them into the small smoking room that opened out of the entry hall, shut the door, and put him into a chair. Then they both stood in front of him, while Toad sat silent and regarded them with much suspicion and ill humour. "Now look here, Toad," said the Rat. "It's about this banquet, and very sorry I am to have to speak to you like this, but we want you to understand clearly once and for all that there are going to be no speeches and no songs.
try to grasp the fact that on this occasion we're not arguing with you. We're just telling you." Toad saw that he was trapped. They understood him. They saw through him. They had got ahead of him. His pleasant dream was shattered. "Mayn't I sing them just one little song?" he pleaded piteously. "No, not one little song," replied the rat firmly, though his heart bled as he noticed the trembling lip of the poor disappointed Toad. "It's no good, Toady. You know well that your songs are all conceit and boasting and vanity, and your speeches are all self-praise and gross exaggeration and gas," put in the Badger in his common way. "It's for your own good, Toady," went on the rat. "You know you must learn to turn over a new leaf sooner or later, and now seems a splendid time to begin. A sort of turning point in your career. Please don't think that saying all this doesn't hurt me more than it hurts you." Toad remained a long while plunged in thought. At last he raised his head, and the traces of strong emotion were visible on his features. "You have conquered, my friends," he said in broken accents. "It was, to be sure, but a small thing that I asked, merely leave to blossom and expand for yet one more evening, to let myself go and hear the tumultuous applause that always seems to me, somehow, to bring out my best qualities. However, you are right, I know, and I am wrong. Henceforth I will be a very different Toad. My friends, you will never have occasion to blush for me again. But oh dear, this is a hard world." And pressing his handkerchief to his face, he left the room with faltering footsteps. "Badger," said the rat, "I feel like a brute. I wonder what you feel like." "Oh, I know," said the Badger gloomily. "But the thing had to be done. This good fellow has got to live here and hold his own and be respected. Would you have him be a common laughing stock, mocked and jeered at by stoats and weasels?" "Of course not," said the rat. "And talking of weasels, it's lucky we came upon that little weasel just as he was setting out with Toad's invitations. I suspected something from what you told me, and had a good look at one or two. They were simply disgraceful. I confiscated the lot, and good Mole is sitting now in the blue boudoir, filling out plain, simple invitation cards." At last the hour for the banquet began to draw near.